So the first question I like to ask is, it's very interesting to look out in the audience and see mainly women, and look at the audience and it's a whole bunch of guys. But it wasn't through lack of trying. I actually had a lot of interest from a lot of strong female educators in Brisbane and in Queensland. Unfortunately, there wasn't any time for them to come around. But it's quite an interesting dynamic to have in the room, because I know some people in the primary cohort at QUT, there's probably about 4 male primary teachers in the cohort. In early childhood, I believe there's 1. And in secondary, I would say the split would probably be 60% women, 40% men. And I asked my students out on PRAC, some of them hadn't had a male teacher until grade 8. How do you feel that affects a student that hasn't had a male teacher until grade 8, and how do we get more men in the teaching profession, especially in early childhood? So Louis, I'll throw that open to you first, especially from a principal from an early childhood primary background. What do you believe about men in that profession?
Well, firstly, at Maridati, currently within my staff, we have a balance, probably a female and male. So I do think that's important. I have been, because I'm an early childhood background, there's not many of us, I do get that sort of a lot of questions, interviews about males and how do we shift and change that. I'm not so sure really, because as I guess a lot of people have alluded to tonight, I think we need good teachers. I mean, I certainly believe that there are a lot of children out there who need strong male role models. But, you know, as far as, if we're looking at a dropout rate of 52%, you know, in terms of within 5 years of any teachers, you know, I think we need to change. I mean, I think there's many things we need to change and draw in more people, get more excited about what we do, how we do that, guys. And from where I sit and how many people I piss off, really, I'm probably not a good person to ask the question.
Does any other panellist members want to jump in on that one?
Look, I think it reflects the status of teaching and the perception of the community that teaching is a female profession, wrongly. So part of it is how do we change that? And part of it, I think, is actually teachers ourselves talking positively about the profession. You know, the number of teachers I hear, thankfully not very much at St Peter's, but elsewhere I've heard, you know, they said, well, don't become a teacher. Well, you know, and they say it's the best and the brightest, you know, why would you become a teacher? So we actually do ourselves a disservice in terms of the profession. So it's about valuing our profession and talking positively about it, and it begins with us and with you in the room.
But we've got to change the profession, don't we? I mean, if that's what the feedback, and it's coming from teachers, that's alarming. So why isn't there shifts and why aren't there changes? And yes, the young blood, I think, to drive those changes is really part of that process. You know, I think what teachers are saying is, you know, I think we should be listening. Yes, there's a lot of whinges. I like some of those comments that you had to say there, but the culture of learning within schools, I think, is just really not sustainable. So I think we've got to change that.
I think the old days, teaching was seen as a nurturing role. So the old days, we're talking the 50s, the 60s, sort of the idea of that then being a female role. It's not the case now. It simply isn't the case. I mean, we're in a space these days where, thankfully, there's far more gender parity than there was. It's still not perfect, but we're getting towards that aspect that it's not really a male or a female role anymore, but that's not permeating through the media. Does that make sense? So actually part of the issue is probably a perception issue caused by the media, I would suggest, and the way that teachers are valued in that sense. It's not just us as a profession talking about what we need to change and with respect to you as educators emerging into the field. It's probably also the way the media reports on teaching. And then the fact that we're driven by NAPLAN, we're driven by stats-driven data, you know.
I will open it up to the audience now. Does anyone want to be very brave and raise their hand and ask something in person? Yes.
Hi, this question's to all of the panel. I was just wondering, when you're in a classroom and you've got a particularly challenging student, you spend all year with them, you really invest in trying to, you know, maybe manage the problems they present, and they're just not giving anything back, and they're not really coming around, and you're treating them with respect, you've been calm, all those kinds of key things. How do you deal with that? Like, because you've invested and now you're maybe disappointed. How would you deal with a student like that in the classroom?
Can I have a go at that?
Is it?
One of the absolute joys, but it'll look like a frustration, is that there are times when you will invest deeply in someone and you will not see the fruit of that labour. So there are times when you will work really hard on a student and not on them, with them. You know, so you develop the relationship, you get into their space, you find out who they are, you do everything that you can do to help them grow, and they don't either see it or you don't see the improvement. And so it's kind of almost like you've planted the seed and you've watered it, but someone else gets to see the plant and the fruit. And sometimes for various reasons you just have to be okay with that, okay? Because everyone has a different growth path to them, and some people there's a fight, they don't grow very well, and then a period of time later they do, and they see fruit. And I had a student many years ago who I really enjoyed teaching. But she always seemed just a bit resistant to it. And she wrote me a letter probably 10 years later and said, thank you for investing and persisting when I was actually pushing back, and she's pushing back on me. And that just, at the time, I just got to the end of the year, this is year 12 with her, I'm like, I've worked really hard for 2 years with you. I haven't seen the kind of the movement back that I would want or normally see. 10 years later, I get a letter. And then the interesting thing is she'd worked out who she was, but she needed to be out of school. So one of the points that Will was making is that sometimes the very formal nature of schooling tied in with the whole adolescent growth thing and everything else is that there are a lot of things happening, and only when someone moves into sort of an adult post-school phase where they start becoming who they are and they start realising the value that you contributed to that. Most of the time you'll never hear about that, you'll probably never even see it. But sometimes you just know you put in the work and the fruit will come, and someone else will see that fruit, but you've done the work. And if you value that person, you just keep working on them. And even if they're pushing, you keep working.
I think the only thing I could add to that as a new teacher who has not had the perspective or the range of that yet, I've only just seen my first group of year 11s, just about to finish year 12 now. And I have to say, the only thing I could possibly add to that is you've got to have thick skin. You got to never take it personally, and you got to not allow that to then shape your relationship with them. Like, obviously it might be an indicator you have to try a little bit harder. Maybe it's an indication you need to step back a little bit and they're resisting because they feel a little bit smothered. But all you can do is to be consistent and don't treat them differently to others because of it, and try and approach them with that fresh sense every day. So if they are particularly difficult for you one afternoon, don't come in the next morning holding on that grudge, because they will sense it, and that will only worsen the relationship.
The thing I'll add to that too is that sometimes students, their strategy is they'll push hard back on you, and that the plan is that you'll get tired of it and you'll just let them be. You'll just let them do what they want to do. And other students, if you draw them close and you keep investing them despite everything else, so they keep shoving at you and you keep pulling them in. Okay? It says when someone values you, they keep committing. They learn something about life when you commit despite them shoving.
Next question, we'll continue on. This is a really good question, a really brave question. I understand why it was sent through anonymously. Tim, you said in the interview process that you talk about how interviewees manage stress when they come in and whether they have avenues for that. What should someone do if they have a diagnosed history with mental illness, where sometimes no matter what they're going to do, they're going to have depression, they're going to have anxiety, maybe they're medicated for that certain illness? If that's something that someone just has to hack, should they be open and honest about that, and how should they deal with that if they do get the job?
So I'd say, firstly, society's attitude towards mental illness has changed in the last 5 or 10 years, and fortunately, we're not there yet, but we're moving in the direction. It's just the same as a broken arm or or heart surgery. It's an illness that can be treated, that can be to be worked with. So I'd actually suggest that A, it's not the stigma it once was, and B, if you're open and honest with the school about these sorts of things, they can then actually work with you, as opposed to them not understanding what you're going through or what's happening. Because then if you don't understand or don't know about it, it's very hard to do to try and support that person.
I think the key is transparency. I think with anything in an interview, the key is transparency. And I think that Let's be honest, it's a very, very sensitive subject. The idea of the mental conditions is a very sensitive subject, and I can understand why the person who asked the question is asking about the issue of perception, but you've got to understand that the key word there is perception, and very often that can be a self-perception. If you're honest with an interview panel, that's no longer a judgment of you, it's a judgment of them. Does that make sense? As an institution, as an educational institution, as you've just heard from Tim there, he's aware of the fact that, and as many employers are these days, they're aware of the fact that things have shifted. And I think that's a really important thing to understand. So the minute you disclose that information, it's no longer a test of you.
I'd just play the devil's advocate. I'd shut my mouth, I'd get the job, and then I'd go after I got the job. Because while this is true and there is a shift, to me, I don't think when I see what adults can't even cope with young children, they're not going to cope very well with adults on their stuff. And I'm not saying that I don't understand. We're a small school. We know if a staff member is taken out, the pressure it applies financially. How do we fill that space? I'd play the game, get in, and then I'd start, to be honest. Just saying.
Yes.
I'm only talking to whoever's in.
Yes.
Say you've got something like anxiety or whatever, and you're very good at coping with it, and it might be a case of you might panic in a school year like once a term or something. Would you mention that to who's interviewing you, or just not, because you know that it's not going to happen that often and you're very good at coping with it? Do you know what I mean? Like, would you tell the interviewer that?
Yeah, DJ?
Jump in on that and just say, I would personally suggest you cross that bridge when you get to it. If you think it's going to be a small issue and it's something you can bounce back from, once you're in there and you're established and you've already proven your worth and they see that you are that worthwhile person that you are, then having those down moments, you will notice the longer you're in the profession, people have terrible moments. People have lows. You will see tears in the staff room. People have horrible things going on in their real life that spills into their day, and that's unavoidable. And if you've built that network and you've kind of solidified yourself in that culture already, they will support you through it. And it's more about saying, look, here is why I am valuable, and then later on people will understand that everyone is flawed. That's the ideal, and that's the goal. Obviously, I cannot speak for everyone, and I cannot speak for every institution, but 99% of the time, at least try and rely a little bit on human decency from those around you. I'm seeing some shaking your head, which doesn't always happen, but at least that's how I would tackle it as a person who does occasionally have issues with my brain.
Great.
I'm a little bit more optimistic than Louis on my right here, to be honest with you. He's shaking his head, but I'm not. And the one thing I would say to you is, I would actually, a bit of a Trojan horse thing here, I'd ask the school about its induction program and its support structures for the first year teacher, and what the support structures and mechanisms are in place to support you as a professional. Because then you're looking, and it comes back to what I was saying previously, this is a test of the employer, not a test of you at that point. And then you know, if it's a question of managing your anxiety at that point, you know what the structure is. Do you go to your line manager? Do you go to your mentor? Do you have somebody who's assigned to you in that first year? And as Daniel said, there is human decency there in that staff room. It may not be an official mentor relationship, but you're not going to be on an island for the whole year. There will be people you can form rapport with.
All right, we'll move on. Does anyone have any questions I'd like to ask by raising their hand? Yes.
I was just wondering, as the beginning teacher, what sort of support in general would we sort of be expecting a school to provide to us? I know it's different for each school and different schools provide it in different ways, but just sort of generalised, what sort of support should we be expecting or should we be seeking?
I would say seeking more than expecting. Don't expect anything. Obviously, because that could lead to some very severe disappointments and disillusionment. But that's the real world. Like, if you go into a job expecting them to help you through it, I'm sure that's what you would love and obviously look for it. But if you expect it, I feel you will struggle. Especially, you have to understand that these people either just have gone through what you have and they will probably hopefully remember that and try and be forthcoming with aid. Otherwise, if you're not ready for it, maybe you should be thinking about what you could do to cope and try and bring something to the table and seek out those goals for yourself, as opposed to expecting those structures to be there for you, which is probably not the greatest situation for it to be, but it might be the reality that you come into.
I think that's a good point about reality, all right? Like, not every school is going to have an induction program in place, all right? That's just the reality of our profession. What it comes down to also is your proactive nature as a teacher. You know what I mean? How proactive are you going to be? So when I was coming back to what I was saying about going into your classroom 3 or 4 days beforehand, thinking about how you're going to approach your year, that is important. That mental preparation side of teaching is incredibly underrated, but it's very important, right? So for you, it might be, how am I going to deal with a parent-teacher interview? How am I going to deal with working mark load? Is a massive thing, particularly in my subject, English. How am I going to mark? Am I going to leave my marking to the weekend? Some people are night markers, some are early. How am I going to approach it? You know what I mean? So, and those are professional conversations you can have with not just one person, but a variety of people. Like Daniel said, it's about initiative. All right. So, if you haven't got a recognised support structure, create your own. Be proactive.
We'll move on to the next question. Question I got through the iPad is, a big talking point throughout my course has been differentation and supporting kids at the end, at the top level, in the middle, and at the low. Now, I've heard lecturers and tutors and teachers talk about this realistically, and then I've also had people where I've looked through their itinerary, they've actually never had any time in the classroom ever, and they fully expect 30 written lesson plans for every single individual child, every lesson, every day. How realistic is differentiation in the classroom, and how do we, as young teachers, get through all the conflict about it and find something that works for us? Chris, how would you deal with that, and suggestions that you would give to QUT and other uni students leaving into the workforce?
Probably the first thing is actually you're part of a team, and those people who have been in school for a while will have some understanding of the nature of the students in a given cohort. So leverage that experience. Ask them, what are the strategies that we use? Some schools have very formalised structures for differentiation, others don't. But I would recommend that the strategy moving forward is you can't really differentiate until you actually understand the range of abilities in your classes, where the strengths and weaknesses are. So the first priority is actually to understand the kids and what they need from you, and then leverage the experience of your colleagues. You don't need to reinvent the wheel here. There are often core things that you're going to teach, and there will be known strategies for differentiating around that space. There's certainly an ideal, but pragmatically, which is where I sit, there will be groupings of students where you can have different differentiation strategies with them. And again, you don't need to invent all those things from scratch. Having a good staff room conversation with someone, say, how do you extend students with this topic? You'll have colleagues who can tell you very efficient ways to do that. You don't invent that, you borrow that. The word I'd use is appropriate, which means you grab it and you make it work in your classroom space. Highly experienced teachers, which is where you'll end up, have pedagogical tool sets, which means that this is not working for the student, this is something else I'll try with them. They've learnt that through experience. You can leverage your college experience. That's what I'd do as a early career teacher.
Move on to our next question, and this one's from the iPad as well. I'll direct this one to Tim. When we're graduating, there's a lot of information, as I'm sure you can appreciate, in terms of how to go about getting into a public school, a private school, what things we need to sign up, what documents we need to produce. Something that's been floating around a lot when I've been graduating is what type of certificates or degrees or diplomas we need for religious schools. Some require that we do formal training in their chosen faith. Others kind of just talk about Christian values in the interview process. If we wanted to go to a specific religious school, what type of background information would you suggest we look at, if any?
So really, you need to do your research around the school and the school system. There are a lot of systemic Catholic schools. So if you went to Brisbane Catholic Education Office website, there'd be requirements around what they expect of their teachers, either prior to or on being employed. In Lutheran schools, we're not looking for anything in particular, but we do expect all our teachers in the first 3 years to undergo 10 hours a year, so a total of 30 hours over 3 years of a course we call Pathways, and it's really about trying to help people understand why it is what we do, in Lutheran schools. So, we talk about treating each child with care, dignity and respect. There's actually a reason why we do it, in that we believe that each child, each person is created in God's image and is a loved child of God, and therefore that influences the way that we do pastoral care, it influences the way we do behaviour management, it influences all our relationships in the staff rooms, all those sorts of things. So different schools, different denominations will have different requirements, and you really got to do the research around that. Certainly lots of Catholic schools, Lutheran schools look favourably on if you've got some sort of certificate or diploma in theology that enables you to teach Christian studies or religious studies, because they're always looking for teachers to teach those areas, in addition to maths and physics and history and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. A question through the iPad. I'll direct this one to Louis. We're talking about differentiation. Your Maridati is very centred on student learning rather than just a one-size-fits-all approach. How best do we find students' best abilities, and then how do we cater for the higher end students and differentiate effectively rather than just tokenistically?
Gosh, to answer within 1 minute is almost impossible. So, firstly, I'm a Gonski fan who talks about individualised tailored learning, which is what we're on about. Reality is, we are so far from being able to do that. One, the expectations on our teachers, and one of the reasons they're leaving in droves, they do not have the time. And children are presenting in such complex ways. Anxiety is a good example. How that looks can often be interpreted as, this child that is bad or difficult or troublesome. So I think we've got a long way to go to be able to support that. And I think that's one dimension. So we're talking about, how does this child present, if you like. In terms of learning, I feel very fortunate because, yes, I have had a lot of experience, and my group I currently work with is 16, which is quite large for Maridati. But at the same time, I'm working with, I work in a team. Everything is shared. I think we have 4 or 5 adults as part of that team. So we're able to, a part of that's relationship, which is, how do you get to know? Interests, fascinations are really, we think a lot of people, a lot of education systems are more interested in what children can't do. We start with what they can do. So what they're interested in, what they're fascinated, get to know them, connection again, what drives them. At the same time, we talk about connection. I think that's the key in terms of getting under their skin, which is trying to work out how they tick. The other thing, we have open conversations about what I'm good at and what I suck at. Children at the moment are under so much pressure. Parents are unrealistic. Children have, something that fires them up. I think that's the starting point. And also get them to understand that it's really okay not to be so good at everything. I think that's just bullshit, quite frankly. I think that's a starting point. The cool part is if you get them fired up about what they do like and what they are interested in, what we find is they'll come and say, hey, listen, I'm not really good at this, but gee, I like it. Because if I can do that, that means I can do that. So you've got them then starting to use that, I think, that beginning point, and drive and motivate them to do things that are more challenging, more difficult than they find.
Question is, from the iPad that came through, is someone in the audience that's not in their 4th year, that's maybe in their 2nd or 3rd, that's at least a distance away from graduating and actually going through the job seeking process. What things could you suggest someone that's quite far away from graduation but still would like to be on the front foot and get involved with schools earlier?
So I talked about independent schools having extensive co-curricular programs. The opportunity to coach, instruct on the debating team, be part of the service learning program, is a great opportunity. Schools need person power to staff those sort of things. It gives you really good experiences to try out different things you're learning at university around how you give instructions, how you give feedback, how you structure classes, all that sort of stuff. You're learning those practical skills, and lots of independent schools also pay money for people to do that. So you can actually, so that they're the sorts of things I look for on a CV. Has this person actually been proactive in trying to involve themselves in other things in the community that are actually going to enhance the value that they're going to bring to the school? So if they've had 3 or 4 years coaching a sporting team, or and done a level 1 coaching certificate, or they've been part of a community service group where they go out and make a difference in the community, they're really important things.